Imagine waking up one day to find the sun no longer rises, the sky is shrouded in thick darkness, and stars fall like raining fire. The ground trembles violently, skyscrapers collapse like dominoes, and people scream in terror, desperately searching for an escape from the impending doom. This is not a scene from a Hollywood apocalypse movie. It is the terrifying vision described in the Book of Revelation, the final book of the Bible, containing prophecies about the end of the world. The Book of Revelation is more than just a collection of predictions about divine judgment and the fall of civilizations. It serves as a dire warning about the consequences of greed, war, disease, and moral decay. But are these prophecies a glimpse into the future, or are they simply a reflection of historical cycles that have repeated themselves throughout human existence? Could we already be living in the days when these prophecies are beginning to unfold? In this video, we will explore the 10 most terrifying prophecies in the Book of Revelation, delve into their meanings, connect them with historical events and modern-day realities, and most importantly, uncover the lessons we can learn from them. Prepare yourself, because what you are about to hear may completely change the way you see the world. Revelation 6:1-8. The prophecy in the Book of Revelation. According to the Book of Revelation, when the first 4 seals are broken, 4 horsemen emerge, each symbolizing a different form of devastation that will plague the world. The white horse, the conqueror, riding a white horse, carrying a bow. This horseman represents conquest and domination. Some scholars interpret this as the expansion of empires, the rise of totalitarian regimes, or even the spread of ideologies that control people's minds. The red horse. War. Riding a red horse, wielding a sword. This figure symbolizes war, bloodshed, and violent conflicts. With his arrival, peace is taken away from the world, and people turn against each other in battle. The black horse. Famine. Riding a black horse, carrying a pair of scales, this horseman represents economic collapse, inflation, and food shortages. People will struggle to earn enough just to eat, and basic necessities will become scarce. The pale green horse. Death. Riding a pale green horse, this figure brings disease, natural disasters, and widespread destruction. Death spreads across the world, not only through illness, but also through war, famine, and wild beasts turning against humankind. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse are often seen as signs of the final days, where humanity faces the consequences of its own actions. Modern-day connections. Are the 4 horsemen among us? Whether you believe in prophecy or not, it's undeniable that the forces represented by the 4 horsemen are active in our world today. The white horse, conquest and control. The expansion of powerful nations through geopolitical and military influence. The spread of radical ideologies, influencing millions of people worldwide. The rise of AI surveillance, digital control, and mass data collection, limiting individual freedoms. The red horse, ongoing wars, and military conflicts such as the Russia-Ukraine war and unrest in the Middle East. Threats of a third world war as global superpowers continue to escalate tensions. Political violence and civil unrest, eroding trust in peace and diplomacy. The black horse, famine and economic collapse. Record-breaking inflation, making food and necessities unaffordable for millions. Droughts and climate change, devastating agricultural production worldwide. Widening wealth inequality, where the rich get richer while the poor suffer. The pale green horse, death and disease, COVID-19, Ebola, HIV, AIDS, and other deadly diseases continue to threaten humanity. Extreme natural disasters such as earthquakes, tsunamis, hurricanes, and wildfires. Rising rates of depression and suicide as people struggle with modern existential crises. While some may argue that these events are simply natural cycles in history, others believe they are signs of a coming reckoning. Theological perspective. What does the Bible say? From a theological standpoint, the Four Horsemen are not just divine punishments, but consequences of humanity's own choices. The Four Horsemen do not come randomly. They are released as a direct result of moral decay and human decisions. Mankind has always had the power to choose righteousness over corruption, but when greed, hatred, and selfishness prevail, destruction follows. The world will not remain in chaos forever. The book of Revelation also promises a new world, where evil is defeated and justice prevails. Even though the prophecy of the Four Horsemen is terrifying, it is not the end of the story. It is a warning and a call for humanity to reflect and change before it is too late. Lessons to learn. The Four Horsemen are not just supernatural beings. They are symbols of the four greatest crises in human history. What they represent has happened, is happening, and will continue to happen unless people change their ways. We have the power to influence the course of our world. Chaos and destruction cannot last forever. If humanity embraces morality, compassion, and justice, things can improve. The Four Horsemen do not control our destiny. Our actions today determine the future. Regardless of whether one believes in the book of Revelation, each of us can play a role in preventing the spread of war, famine, disease, and unchecked ambition. The Four Horsemen may be seen as harbingers of the end, but they can also serve as a wake-up call, a reminder that only through human awakening can the world be saved. Revelation 7:14. The prophecy in the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation speaks of the Great Tribulation, a period of immense suffering when humanity will face wars, natural disasters, plagues, and ultimate chaos. This is not just a time of destruction, but also a test of faith, morality, and endurance. According to Scripture, only those who remain faithful and righteous will endure the Great Tribulation and be rewarded in the kingdom of God. But the real question is, are we already living in the Great Tribulation? Modern-day connections. Are we at the threshold of the Great Tribulation? If we examine our world today, we see alarming signs of unprecedented crisis. The Russia-Ukraine war has lasted for over 2 years, claiming hundreds of thousands of lives and causing the worst humanitarian crisis in Europe since World War II. World War II, 1939 to 1945, killed over 70 million people, leaving nations in ruin. China's Great Famine, 1959 to 1961, resulted in 36 million deaths due to starvation and policy failures. COVID-19, Ebola, HIV/AIDS have taken millions of lives and reshaped global society. Climate change-driven disasters, including earthquakes, wildfires, floods, and hurricanes, are worsening global suffering. Whether or not these events mark the biblical Great Tribulation, they undeniably reveal a world in crisis, where suffering, war, and chaos are increasing. Is this merely a phase in history, or are we truly approaching the Great Tribulation? Theological perspective, a divine judgment or a human-made disaster? From a theological standpoint, the Great Tribulation is not just punishment, it is also a purification. Wars, natural disasters, and diseases serve as tests of human nature. Will we respond with greed and violence, or with kindness and resilience? Revelation promises that those who endure the Great Tribulation will be rewarded, which can be understood as those who maintain faith, morality, and compassion will find peace. God does not create chaos, humanity does. War, famine, and climate disasters are the consequences of human greed, corruption, and negligence. Looking at the Russia-Ukraine war and other conflicts, one must ask, is this part of the Great Tribulation, or simply the result of human failure? Lessons to learn, regardless of one's beliefs. It is clear, we are living in a time of immense trials. Can we prevent these catastrophes? Perhaps not entirely, but we can lessen suffering by embracing kindness, responsibility, and wisdom. Chaos does not last forever. Even in the Bible, salvation follows the Great Tribulation. If we learn from history, we can build a better future. Every person has a role to play. If we wish to avoid a true Great Tribulation, we must end conflict, work for peace, protect nature, and uphold moral values. We may not yet be in the prophesied Great Tribulation, but it is undeniable that the world is facing some of its greatest challenges. And the most important question remains, what will we do to overcome it? Revelation 16:1-21. The prophecy in the Book of Revelation. The Book of Revelation describes 7 bowls of divine wrath, each bringing a catastrophic disaster upon the world as a punishment for those who have turned away from God. These plagues are not just about destruction, but also serve as a warning to humanity about the consequences of its actions. Here are the 7 bowls of wrath and their devastating effects. Water turns to blood. The oceans and freshwater sources become polluted, causing massive marine die-offs. Boils and plagues spread. Painful sores afflict those who bear the mark of the beast. Unbearable scorching heat. The sun's intense heat burns people alive. Darkness engulfs the world. A supernatural darkness covers the land. Floods and natural disasters, catastrophic storms, tsunamis, and hurricanes devastate regions. Global warfare erupts. Nations are drawn into the final war, the greatest earthquake in history. A massive earthquake shakes the world, causing the collapse of cities. These disasters symbolize the decline of human civilization before the establishment of God's kingdom. But what is alarming is that these plagues are not just distant prophecies, they are already happening in our modern world. Modern-day connections. Are the 7 bowls unfolding? Looking at today's reality, we see events that mirror the 7 bowls of wrath. Water turns to blood. Pollution is poisoning the oceans, causing massive fish die-offs due to toxic waste. Nuclear contamination, like the Fukushima disaster in Japan, has made water unsafe for marine life and human consumption. Boils and plagues spread deadly pandemics such as COVID-19, Ebola, and HIV/AIDS have wreaked havoc on global health. In slums of the Philippines, India, and parts of Africa, poor sanitation has led to outbreaks of cholera, tuberculosis, and dengue fever. Unbearable scorching heat. Climate change has led to record-breaking heat waves, causing extreme droughts in India, Africa, and the Middle East. Wildfires in Europe, the US, and Australia are intensifying, destroying vast ecosystems. Darkness engulfs the world. Air pollution has turned entire cities dark, such as in Beijing, Delhi, and Jakarta, where people must wear masks daily due to hazardous smog. Floods and natural disasters. The Philippines, Indonesia, and Bangladesh experience devastating typhoons and floods annually, displacing millions. Earthquakes in Nepal, 2015, Haiti, 2010, and Indonesia have left nations in ruins. Global warfare erupts. The Russia-Ukraine war has lasted for over 2 years, drawing concerns about a larger conflict. Tensions in the Middle East, Taiwan, and the South China Sea could escalate into a global war. The greatest earthquake in history. Scientists warn that a mega-earthquake is due within this century, with high-risk zones in San Andreas, USA, and the Pacific Ring of Fire. Nations like Japan, Chile, and Mexico are in constant fear of catastrophic seismic activity. With these events happening before our eyes, we must ask, are the 7 bowls of wrath already being poured out upon humanity? Theological perspective, a divine warning or human consequence. From a theological perspective, the 7 bowls of wrath are not only divine punishment, but also a test of humanity's moral integrity and faith. God does not desire suffering, but when humanity exploits nature, wages war, and embraces corruption, it brings destruction upon itself. These disasters may serve as a wake-up call, reminding humanity that the material world is not permanent. Those who remain steadfast in their faith and righteousness will find redemption, not necessarily in a supernatural way, but by choosing to live a life of morality and virtue. The 7 bowls of wrath may be seen as symbolic warnings, but they could also be the reality we are creating through our own actions. Lessons to learn. Can we prevent these disasters? Regardless of whether one believes in the prophecy of Revelation, the reality is clear. The world is facing unprecedented crises. Humanity has the power to alter its destiny by reducing pollution, embracing sustainable living, and avoiding warfare. The 7 bowls of wrath do not have to be inevitable. If we change our behavior, we can prevent large-scale destruction. We all share responsibility in protecting the world, not just for ourselves, but for future generations. Are we on the brink of a biblical apocalypse, or do we still have time to change and save ourselves? Revelation 13, 16, 17. The prophecy in the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation describes the mark of the beast as a sign that whoever does not have it will not be able to buy or sell. It is given to all people, regardless of status, rich or poor, free or enslaved. Many theologians and scholars believe that the mark of the beast is not just a religious symbol, but rather a representation of a total control system where people lose their financial and personal freedoms. The question is, are we moving toward this reality? Modern-day connections. When technology controls people. Today, we see advanced technologies paving the way for a global control system. Facial recognition surveillance. China has built the world's largest surveillance network, with millions of AI-powered cameras tracking citizens' behaviors. Many countries are adopting facial recognition for security, payment systems, and social monitoring. Digital currency and cashless systems. More countries are phasing out cash in favor of fully digital transactions. Central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, could allow governments full control over personal finances. Widespread technology-driven control AI is becoming a powerful tool for mass control, from online content moderation to censorship of free speech. Algorithms can determine who gets access to financial services, information, and personal freedoms. This system is not just present in authoritarian regimes, but is gradually expanding worldwide under the guise of convenience and security. But we must ask, if financial and personal freedoms are fully controlled, are we truly free? Theological perspective, a warning from Revelation. From a biblical standpoint, the mark of the beast is not just a physical sign. It is submission to a system that opposes God. God grants humans free will, but a fully controlled system could take away that freedom. Revelation describes a time when people must accept this mark to survive. Is this becoming a reality with digital systems controlling every aspect of life? If people cannot buy, sell, or participate in society without a mark from a centralized system, are we getting closer to what the Bible warned about? As technological power grows, the line between convenience and control becomes dangerously blurred. Lessons to learn. Are we still free? Regardless of religious belief, the world is moving toward a total surveillance system. Technology can improve lives, but it can also become a tool for oppression. We must think carefully before trading personal freedom for digital convenience. If one day You cannot buy or sell without an authorized mark from the system. Are you truly free? Perhaps the mark of the beast is not a mystical symbol, but rather the invisible control system gradually taking over humanity. Are we entering a digital era where humans lose their autonomy? Revelation 16:16. The prophecy in the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation describes the battle of Armageddon as the ultimate confrontation between good and evil, where the forces of darkness will be completely defeated. According to prophecy, the kings of the earth will gather at a place called Armageddon for the final war against God. In the Bible, Armageddon is not just a physical war, but also a spiritual battle between two opposing forces, light and darkness, righteousness and wickedness, faith and disbelief. This is not just a divine punishment, but the fulfillment of ultimate justice, where evil is finally eradicated. But the question is, are we approaching Armageddon in our modern world? Modern-day connections. Are we on the brink of Armageddon? Looking at the world today, we see escalating global conflicts, with many signs pointing toward a decisive war. Cold War tensions and global armed conflicts. Relations between the US, Russia, and China are becoming more hostile. The Russia-Ukraine war has dragged on for over 2 years, involving Western powers and increasing the risk of global war. Confrontation between superpowers. Tensions over Taiwan between China and the US could spark a major war in Asia. Military and political disputes in the South China Sea, where nations compete for control over resources. The nuclear arms race, as nations like Russia, the US, North Korea, and Iran expand their arsenals. Religious and ideological wars. The Israel-Palestine conflict continues to claim thousands of lives. Growing tensions between different religious, ethnic, and ideological groups worldwide. Terrorism and extremism further divide civilizations and fuel global unrest. Looking at these developments, it is evident that a global-scale war between world powers is becoming increasingly inevitable. But is this the real Armageddon? Theological perspective. A spiritual or physical war. From a biblical perspective, the Battle of Armageddon is not just a military conflict. It is a spiritual and moral confrontation between good and evil. Armageddon is not merely a war between nations, but a battle of ideologies, where humanity must choose between justice and corruption. Each individual faces their own Armageddon as they decide whether to follow righteousness or succumb to greed and destruction. In the end, good will triumph, but only if humanity awakens and stands up for justice. In today's world, we are engaged in a war of ideologies, where traditional values, morality, and faith are under siege. So, is Armageddon a future event, or is it the ongoing battle for the soul of humanity happening every day? Lessons to learn. What must we do? Regardless of one's beliefs, it is clear that the world is heading toward a major confrontation where justice, peace, and the survival of humanity will be decided. We must be aware of global events and resist extremist ideologies. The greatest battle is not between nations, but within each person. Peace is not easy, but if greed, hatred, and war persist, Armageddon may become reality. Are we approaching the final battle, or do we still have time to choose peace and prevent catastrophe? Revelation 18:2-3. The prophecy in the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation describes Babylon as a symbol of wealth, power, and moral corruption. This city does not only represent material prosperity, but also a civilization built on greed, deceit, and moral decay. When the angel proclaims, "Babylon has fallen," it signifies not just the destruction of a physical city, but the collapse of a society built on corruption and excess. Revelation warns, whoever lives in luxury will fall. The question is, are we living in modern-day Babylon? Modern-day connections, are we facing the same fate? Looking at today's world, we see many parallels with biblical Babylon. Global financial crises, market bubbles, national debt, and economic instability have led to major financial crises, such as the 2008 recession and today's inflation surge. Wealth is concentrated in the hands of a few, while millions suffer from poverty. A culture of materialism and moral decay. Society glorifies luxury, fame, and money, while moral and ethical values fade away. Social media fuels narcissism, where people value likes and followers over character. Consumerism and excess entertainment have distracted people from deeper spiritual and ethical pursuits. Corporate and political corruption. Major financial scandals, where corporations manipulate markets for profit, while ordinary people bear the consequences. Governments worldwide have been exposed for corruption and abuse of power. Tech and financial elites control information, money, and personal freedom. Looking at these trends, Babylon is not just a biblical city, it is the reality of our world today. If we continue down this path, according to Revelation, collapse is inevitable. Theological perspective. A warning for humanity. Babylon is not just a physical location, but any system built on greed and corruption. Its fall is inevitable. History has shown that civilizations that abandon morality eventually self-destruct. Can we avoid this fate? Only if we reject excessive materialism and return to moral principles. Rome, Greece, and the British Empire once ruled the world, yet they collapsed from internal decay. Will history repeat itself? Lessons to learn. Are we living in modern Babylon? Money and power do not last forever. A society built on corruption will eventually fall. If we do not change course, we may become the next Babylon in history. Can we prevent this fate, or are we doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past? Revelation 20:11-15. The prophecy in the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation describes the final judgment as the moment when every soul must stand before the throne of God, where the book of life is opened, and each person is judged according to their deeds. No one can hide their sins or escape judgment. Those who lived righteously and with faith will be rewarded, while those who committed evil, lived in deception, and harmed others will face the consequences. This is not just a prophecy about divine judgment, but a universal principle of justice. Every action has a consequence. But could final judgment also reflect Buddhist teachings on karma and reincarnation? Modern-day connections, judgment and karma in everyday life. Final judgment is not just a future event, it is happening every day. Legal punishment for the wicked criminals and corrupt leaders are eventually brought to justice, no matter how long they hide. The law of karma in life. In Buddhism, karma means every action leads to a corresponding consequence. Those who spread hatred, greed, and selfishness will receive suffering in return. Those who practice compassion, kindness, and wisdom will find happiness and peace. Death and the legacy we leave behind. Wealth and power cannot be taken beyond death. Only our actions define our true legacy. Final judgment is not just about what happens after death. It is about how we choose to live right now. Theological perspective, Christianity and Buddhism. 1. Divine justice in Christianity. God's justice is absolute, and no one can deceive him. The righteous enter heaven, while sinners face eternal punishment. 2. Karma and reincarnation in Buddhism. Karma determines one's next life, ensuring that every action has consequences. The ultimate goal is enlightenment, not avoiding judgment. Both traditions teach that no action goes unnoticed, and justice will always prevail. Lessons to learn. Are we ready to face our own judgment? Final judgment is not just a future event. It is happening every day, in every choice we make. Good deeds bring peace, even if no one is watching. Evil actions bring suffering, even if no one discovers them. Every action has consequences, whether in divine judgment or karmic law. If today were your last day, would you be ready for judgment? Revelation 21, 1-4. The prophecy in the book of Revelation. After all suffering, wars, and tribulations, Revelation describes a hopeful vision. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. Revelation 21:1. This prophecy speaks of a new world, free from suffering, war, and death. God will wipe away every tear, and humanity will live in eternal peace. From a theological perspective, the new heaven and the new earth is not just a physical realm, but a state of being where righteousness prevails over corruption and light overcomes darkness. But is this vision only meant for the distant future, or can we begin building the new earth today? Modern-day connections. Can we build a new world? While a perfect world may not yet exist, we are witnessing signs of transformation in modern society. Efforts to end war and conflict, peace agreements, and humanitarian organizations are working to heal the wounds of war. Though conflicts persist, humanity is becoming more aware of the value of peace and dialogue. The rise of compassion and altruism. Charitable organizations, environmental movements, and humanitarian projects are expanding worldwide. People who live with kindness and wisdom are making a real difference in their communities. A shift towards spiritual awareness. More individuals are seeking meaning through spirituality, meditation, and self-growth. The rise of movements promoting healing, mindfulness, and harmony with nature shows that people are awakening to a higher consciousness. These changes prove that a new earth is not impossible, but it must begin within each individual through everyday choices and actions. Lessons to learn. We have the power to choose our fate. The new heaven and the new earth is not just a place, it is a state of mind. No matter the circumstances, we always have the power to choose our response, to live with virtue or to fall into darkness. Hope exists in all situations. No hardship lasts forever. Even in suffering, those who do not give up will always find light. Humans have the power to shape their destiny. Revelation states that those who choose righteousness will be rewarded, while those who choose evil will face the consequences. In reality, every decision we make today shapes the world we will live in tomorrow. Those who live righteously will find peace. A person may lose everything, but if they hold on to kindness and integrity, they will never lose true peace. Heaven is not just a place we go to after death. It is how we choose to live right now. The biggest question is, are we building heaven within our own hearts? If each person chooses to change from within, then the new earth can begin today. Revelation 21:3. The prophecy in the book of Revelation. After the battle of Armageddon, Revelation prophesies that Satan will be bound for 1,000 years. During this period, the world will experience peace, as the source of all temptation, deception, and wickedness is restrained. However, after 1,000 years, Satan will be released once more, bringing one final temptation to test humanity. Only then will he be completely destroyed, and evil will be eradicated forever. This raises an important question. Why is Satan not destroyed immediately? Is it because humanity must be tested once more to truly earn the new earth? Modern-day connections. When history repeats itself. This prophecy can be understood as a recurring cycle in human history. Whenever evil is subdued, humanity has the opportunity to build a peaceful world. But over time, greed, selfishness, and arrogance rise again, leading humanity back to old patterns. World War II ends, 1945. The world enters a period of reconstruction, economic growth, and international cooperation. Cold War begins, 1947 to 1991. Just 2 decades later, a new geopolitical conflict emerges, leading to arms races and proxy wars. Today, wars, corruption, and ideological conflicts persist, proving that evil never truly disappears. It only waits for the right moment to return. This demonstrates that human nature does not change. If we fail to learn from history, we are doomed to repeat its mistakes. Lessons to learn. Evil exists, but we can choose. How to respond. History is a cycle, and we must be aware to avoid repeating mistakes. If humanity does not learn from the past, we will continue the cycle of conflict, ambition, and destruction. Peace is not a permanent destination, but an ongoing process that requires constant awareness. Evil cannot be eradicated entirely, but it can be restrained through morality and vigilance. If people live with integrity, wisdom, and righteousness, they can prevent the resurgence of darkness. Conversely, if people become complacent and succumb to greed and hatred, then Satan, though bound, will always find a way to return. Every person has the choice to become the light or fall into the darkness of greed and hatred. Satan cannot force anyone to do evil. He can only tempt. Each of us has the power to decide which path to follow, and our actions shape the world we live in. If every individual remains vigilant and upholds ethical values, then evil will not be able to return. But if we forget the lessons of history, we will be forced to experience its consequences once again.
The prophecies in the book of Revelation are not just distant visions of the future. When viewed from a realistic perspective, they reflect the natural cycles of history and humanity. The four horsemen of the apocalypse remind us that war, famine, disease, and death are not random events, but the inevitable consequences of greed, hatred, and injustice. The Great Tribulation represents a period of crisis that humanity must endure due to its own actions, showing that we are responsible for the world we create. The 7 bowls of wrath symbolize the disasters already happening before our eyes, from climate change and wars to pandemics and economic collapse. The mark of the beast warns about technological control and the ethical dilemmas humanity will face in the digital age. The Battle of Armageddon is not just a physical war, but also a battle between good and evil, truth and deception, kindness and ambition. Most importantly, the final 2 prophecies remind us that evil cannot prevail forever. If humanity learns its lesson, a new world free from suffering will emerge. Key lessons. We are living in a decisive moment. The future of humanity can lead to either destruction or rebirth, depending on our choices today. Corruption and greed cannot last forever. In the end, they will be eradicated because justice and truth always prevail. We reap what we sow. Every action, every decision today determines our own future and that of future generations. Evil only wins when good people remain silent. Our awareness and willingness to act will decide humanity's fate. If we stand up for what is right, no force can control the world indefinitely. Final message. If there is one lesson to take from the book of Revelation, it is, the power to change always lies in human hands. No matter how terrifying these prophecies seem, they are warnings, not inevitable fates. We can change our destiny. If we take responsibility, remain conscious of the consequences of our actions, and refuse to tolerate evil. Look at the world today. Are we allowing darkness to take over? Or are we fighting for a better future? The choice is ours. This is just an analysis from a personal perspective, and there are certainly many other ways to interpret the prophecies in the book of Revelation. We welcome your thoughts and contributions to help expand perspectives and refine this discussion. If you found this topic insightful, please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel and help us create more valuable content. Let's continue discussing, reflecting, and most importantly, taking responsibility for ourselves and the world around us, because the future is always in our hands.